My name is Margaret Ellis, and I am 78 years old. At my age, most memories come and go like slow clouds drifting across the sky. Some are soft and kind, like the smell of fresh bread or the laughter of children playing in summer rain. Others are storms that never pass. This story is about my granddaughter, Lena. And it is also about how a world inside glowing screens swallowed her hope piece by piece until there was nothing left to hold on to. I tell this now because silence is a dangerous thing. Silence feeds cruelty. Silence protects cowards. And I stayed silent for far too long. I still remember the first time Lena showed me how to use a smartphone. "Grandma, it's easy," she said, sitting beside me on the couch, her braids brushing against my shoulder. "Look, you just tap here." Her fingers moved quickly, confidently. Mine trembled as I tried to copy her. She laughed, but not in a cruel way. It was warm, bright, like sunlight through a kitchen window. "You're doing great," she told me. Lena always spoke like that, gentle, encouraging. She had a way of making people feel safe. Even when she was just a little girl, she comforted others before herself. She was 16 when the trouble began. 16. The age when life should be opening, not closing. We lived together in a small brick house at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had history. My husband built the back porch himself before he passed, hammering each nail with careful hands. Lena used to sit out there with her sketchbook, drawing flowers and faces and sometimes strange dreamlike cities. She was talented, truly talented. Her teachers said so. Her art teacher once told me, "Mrs. Ellis, your granddaughter sees the world in color most people don't even notice." That made me proud. I kept that sentence folded in my heart like a letter. But Lena didn't just draw. She shared her drawings online. At first, I didn't understand what that meant. "Online where?" I asked. "Social media, Grandma," she said, smiling. "People from all over can see my art." "All over the world?" She nodded, her eyes shining. I remember thinking how wonderful that sounded. A world where art could travel farther than any airplane. I didn't yet understand that cruelty travels just as fast. It started small. At least, that's what Lena told me. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone. Her shoulders were tense, tight like pulled rope. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied quickly. But I knew that word, nothing, often hides everything. "Let me see your face," I said. She looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just comments," she admitted after a pause. "Some people being mean." Mean. Such a small word for such sharp wounds. "What kind of mean?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Then she turned the phone toward me. I squinted at the tiny letters. Some comments were about her art, mocking, dismissive. But others were about her skin, her hair, her identity. Words filled with hatred I hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. Not since the days when people whispered insults under their breath and pretended innocence. Except now, there was no whispering. Only shouting behind screens. Why would they say these things? I murmured. She shrugged, but her fingers trembled. "I don't know," she said quietly. I wanted to tell her to ignore them. That was my generation's advice. Ignore cruelty and it will lose power. But the world she lived in was different. These words didn't fade into air. They stayed. Saved. Shared. Repeated. Every day, more strangers appeared, leaving uglier messages than before. Some mocked her drawings, saying they were ugly. Some told her to stop posting. And some used words that cut deeper than knives. "Go back where you came from. You don't belong here. You people ruin everything." I read those words and felt a coldness settle into my bones. Lena had been born in this town. She belonged as much as anyone else. But the internet didn't care about truth. It cared about noise. At first, she tried to laugh it off. "People are just jealous," she said once, forcing a grin. But laughter can only hide pain for so long. Soon, she stopped showing me her drawings. Her sketchbook stayed closed. The porch grew quiet. And that worried me more than anything. Because silence in a young artist is a dangerous sign. One night, I found her sitting in the dark living room. Phone glowing in her hands like a tiny moon. She didn't notice me at first. Her face was wet with tears. "Lena," I whispered. She flinched, startled. "Grandma." Her voice cracked. I sat beside her and gently took the phone. There were hundreds of comments. Hundreds. Some strangers had created fake pictures mocking her face. Others edited her artwork into cruel jokes. Some even sent private messages filled with slurs and threats. I felt sick. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Months," she whispered. "Months." And I hadn't known. That realization hit me harder than anything else. I was her grandmother, her guardian, and yet pain had been growing right under my roof without my understanding. "I thought it would stop," she said softly, "if I ignored them." I placed my arm around her shoulders. "You shouldn't face this alone," I said. But even as I spoke, I didn't yet know how deep the damage had gone. Days passed, then weeks, and Lena began to change. Not all at once, slowly, like a candle losing its flame. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped playing music while cooking, stopped calling her friends. Her appetite faded. Her energy vanished. Even her posture changed, shoulders hunched, head lowered, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Invisible. That word haunted me, because cruelty often tries to make people feel invisible, or worse, unwanted. One afternoon, I overheard her whispering in her room. At first, I thought she was talking to a friend, but when I passed the door, I realized she was reading comments aloud. Mocking ones. Cruel ones. Repeating them under her breath like they were truths instead of lies. My heart broke in that moment. Because words, when repeated enough, begin to feel real, even when they are not. I knocked gently. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door. Her room, once filled with colorful drawings, looked empty now. Sketches were torn from walls. Paper scraps lay crumpled in the trash. "Why did you take your art down?" I asked softly. She looked at the floor. "Because they hate it," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "They hate what they don't understand." But she didn't look convinced. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the ticking clock in the hallway. Each tick felt heavier than the last. I kept replaying the hateful words I had read. And I kept wondering, how many more were there? How many times had she read them alone in the dark? How many nights had she cried without calling my name? I had lived through difficult years, segregation, protests, whispered hatred in public places. But this was different. Cruelty no longer needed courage. It only needed a keyboard. The next morning, I made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries. She sat at the table, pushing food around her plate. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "maybe we should talk to someone. A counselor, perhaps." Her eyes widened. "I'm not crazy," she said quickly. "I didn't say you were." "I can handle it," she insisted. But her voice trembled. And I knew she couldn't. Not alone. Days turned into weeks. The messages didn't stop. They multiplied. Every time she posted something, even something small, the cruelty returned stronger than before, like a storm that refused to pass. One evening, she deleted all her social media accounts. I watched her do it. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a long time before pressing the final button. "There," she said quietly. "Do you feel better?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "I feel empty." That word frightened me more than anger ever could. Empty. Because emptiness leaves room for despair. And despair is a dangerous companion. I wish I could tell you that things improved after that. That deleting those accounts brought peace. That the silence healed her. But life does not always follow hopeful paths. Sometimes, even after the noise fades, the damage remains, echoing in the mind long after the screen goes dark. And that was only the beginning of the storm that would take my granddaughter from me. I didn't know it then. But the worst was still ahead. And I would soon learn that words, even those written by strangers, can carry weight heavy enough to crush a young heart. I did not understand at first how deep the damage had gone. I thought that once Lena deleted those accounts, once the hateful voices disappeared from her screen, life would slowly return to normal. I believed time would heal her. the way it healed scraped knees and broken hearts when she was younger. But I was wrong. The internet may have gone quiet, but the words stayed inside her. They lived in her mind now. And that is a place far harder to escape. Winter arrived early that year. Cold winds pressed against the windows, and frost crept across the glass like pale fingers. Lena used to love winter. She liked wrapping herself in blankets, sipping hot chocolate, sketching snow-covered trees. That winter, she barely touched her pencils. Her sketchbook sat stacked in the corner, untouched, gathering dust like forgotten memories. Sometimes I caught her staring at them, not with longing, but with something heavier. Shame. That is what it looked like to me. And shame is a cruel companion. It convinces you that the lies spoken about you are truths. Her school called me one afternoon. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. "Mrs. Ellis?" the voice said politely. "This is the attendance office." My stomach tightened. Yes. Lena has missed several assignments recently, and her teachers are concerned. She's been unusually quiet in class. Quiet. That word again. Too much quiet can swallow a person whole. "I'll speak with her," I promised. But when I hung up the phone, my hands trembled. Because something deep inside me whispered that this was more than school stress. Much more. That evening, Lena sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Your school called today," I said gently. She didn't react right away. Just blinked slowly. "They said you've been quiet." She gave a small shrug. "I'm just tired." "Are you sleeping?" She hesitated. "Sometimes." That answer told me everything. Dark circles had begun to form under her eyes. Her once bright expression now looked distant, like she was watching the world from far away. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "are the messages still bothering you?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. "They don't stop," she whispered. "But you deleted your accounts." "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I still hear them." That sentence pierced my heart, because it meant the cruelty had rooted itself deep inside her thoughts. A few days later, I found something that frightened me more than anything before. I was cleaning her room, something I rarely did without asking, when I noticed a notebook hidden beneath her mattress. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me felt guilty, but another part, the part that loved her more than anything, told me to look. Inside were pages filled with words. Not drawings. Words. Some were sentences. Others were phrases repeated again and again. "They're right. I don't belong. I ruin everything." Each line looked heavier than the last, written in dark ink pressed deep into the paper. I felt tears blur my vision, because those were not strangers' voices anymore. They were hers. That night, I sat beside her on the couch. "I found your notebook," I said quietly. Her face drained of color. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. "I'm glad I did," I replied gently. Silence stretched between us. Long. Heavy. Finally, I took her hand. "Lena, those things written there, they are lies." She shook her head. "They can't all be lies," she murmured. "Yes, they can," I said firmly. "Cruel people repeat lies until they sound real." Tears filled her eyes. "I tried to ignore them," she said. "I really did." "I know. I tried to be strong." "You are strong." Her voice cracked. "I don't feel strong." That was the first night she admitted something I will never forget. "I wish I could disappear sometimes," she whispered. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Disappear. Not die, not yet, but disappear. It was a dangerous step toward darkness. I held her tightly. "You matter," I told her. "More than you know." But inside, fear began to grow. Because wishing to disappear is often the beginning of losing hope. I decided then that we needed help. Professional help. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Immediately. The next morning, I called a counselor recommended by her school. Making that call felt like lifting a mountain. I worried Lena would hate me for it. But love sometimes requires difficult choices. Her first therapy appointment was on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Rain fell steadily outside, tapping against the car roof like quiet drums. Lena sat beside me in silence during the drive. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers twisting together. Are you angry with me? I asked softly. She shook her head. No. Are you scared? A small nod. So am I admitted. That surprised her. She looked at me for the first time that day. You, she asked. Yes, I said gently. Because I love you. The counselor was a kind woman with warm eyes and soft speech. She invited Lena into her office while I waited outside. Those 40 minutes felt longer than entire years. I watched the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Each second stretched painfully. When Lena finally came out, her expression looked different. Not happy, not healed, but slightly lighter. Like a window had been opened in a room that had been closed too long. How was it? I asked carefully. She hesitated, then said quietly, okay. That one word gave me a small piece of hope. And hope, even in tiny pieces, is precious. Weeks passed, and therapy became part of our routine. Some days were better than others. Some days she smiled faintly, but truly. Other days she barely spoke at all. Healing is not a straight path. It twists. It turns. It sometimes feels like walking through thick fog. But the outside world did not forget her. That was the next cruel surprise. One afternoon, Lena came home pale and shaking. What happened? I asked, alarmed. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed me her phone. My heart pounded as I read the screen. Someone had taken screenshots of her old posts, the ones she thought were gone, and shared them again. The hateful comments had returned. Not directly to her this time, but about her. Spreading, circulating, mocking. Cruelty, once released into the world, does not disappear easily. It multiplies. They won't leave me alone, she whispered. Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. I wrapped my arms around her, but she felt fragile in my embrace, like glass that might shatter with the slightest pressure. That night, she barely ate, barely spoke, barely moved. She just stared into space as if watching something invisible. And that terrified me more than tears ever had. Because tears mean pain. Silence sometimes means surrender. One evening, I heard a strange sound from her room. Soft, broken, like someone trying not to cry. I knocked gently. Lena. No answer. I opened the door. She sat on the floor beside her bed, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her shoulders shook. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. Those words froze my blood. You can, I said, kneeling beside her. I'm tired, she murmured. Tired of what? Being hated. Tears streamed down her face. I didn't do anything wrong, she cried. No, I said firmly. You didn't. Then why do they treat me like this? I had no answer. And that silence felt heavier than any words. That night, I stayed awake outside her door. I sat in a chair, listening for movement, listening for breathing, listening for anything that told me she was still there, still alive, still holding on. Fear had settled into my bones by then, deep, cold, unrelenting, because I began to see how fragile hope had become inside her, like a candle flickering in a violent wind. I wish I could say things improved after that. I wish I could tell you that love alone saved her. But life does not always reward love the way we hope. Sometimes, even when you do everything you can, darkness keeps growing. And in the days that followed, Lena began to withdraw in ways that frightened me more than anything before. She stopped going out, stopped answering messages from friends, stopped looking in mirrors. One afternoon, she said something that still echoes in my memory, something that made my heart sink into my chest. Grandma, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if the world would be better without me? There are moments in life that split time into two pieces. Before and after. The morning I lost Lena was one of those moments. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes expecting to hear her footsteps in the hallway. I still imagine the sound of her humming softly while brushing her teeth, or the scratch of pencil against paper on the back porch. But that morning, the house was too quiet. And silence, when it is too deep, feels wrong. It was a Thursday. Cold, gray, ordinary, at least at first. I woke early, as I always did, before the sun had fully risen. Old habits stay with you after decades of routine. I shuffled into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and listened to its familiar bubbling sound. Normally, Lena would come down a few minutes later, wrapped in her oversized sweater, hair slightly messy, eyes still sleepy. "Morning, Grandma," she would mumble. That morning she didn't. At first I didn't worry. Teenagers sleep late sometimes, I told myself. I poured 2 cups of coffee anyway, one for me, one for her hot chocolate later. Habit is a stubborn thing. Time passed. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Still no sound from upstairs. No footsteps. No doors opening. Just silence pressing against the walls. A strange feeling settled into my chest, tight and cold, like the air had changed. I told myself not to panic, but my hands were already trembling as I walked toward the staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, louder than usual, as if the house itself was warning me. "Lena." I called softly. No answer. "Sweetheart." Still nothing. That was when fear truly took hold. Not loud, dramatic fear. Quiet fear. The kind that creeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I reached her door. It was closed. That wasn't unusual. But something felt wrong, something I still cannot fully explain. I knocked. "Lena." Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "Lena, honey?" No answer. My heart began to pound. Fast, hard, painful. "Lena, I'm coming in," I said, my voice shaking. I turned the handle. What I saw next is a memory I carry like a scar. I will not describe it in detail. Some memories are too heavy to place into words. But I knew in that instant that something terrible had happened. That my granddaughter, my bright, gentle, talented Lena, had lost her fight against the darkness that had followed her for so long. I remember screaming. A sound so loud and raw that it didn't feel human. It came from somewhere deep inside me. A place made of fear and love and unbearable grief. I called emergency services with shaking hands, barely able to speak. I remember repeating her name over and over. "Lena. Lena. Lena." As if saying it enough times would bring her back. As if love alone could undo what had been done. But some things cannot be undone. And that is the cruelest truth of all. The days that followed felt unreal. Like living inside a nightmare that refused to end. People came to the house. Police officers, paramedics, neighbors. Their voices sounded distant. Muted. Like echoes underwater. Someone placed a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else asked questions. I answered them without thinking. Without feeling. Because my mind had already shattered into pieces. The funeral was held a week later. A gray sky stretched above us, heavy with clouds. Friends from school came. Teachers came. Even people I didn't recognize stood quietly among the crowd. Many of them cried. Many of them whispered how kind she had been. How talented. How gentle. How bright. And as I listened, one thought kept repeating inside my head. Why didn't they say these things when she needed to hear them most? After the service, her art teacher approached me. She carried a large folder. "I wanted you to have these," she said softly. Inside were Lena's drawings, ones she had kept at school. Beautiful sketches. Faces filled with emotion. Landscapes glowing with color. Dreamlike cities stretching into golden skies. I traced my fingers across the paper, tears blurring my vision. She had been so gifted, so full of imagination, so full of life. And yet, cruel words from strangers had convinced her she was worthless. That truth still breaks me. Weeks turned into months. The house changed. Or perhaps it was me that changed. Every room held echoes of her presence. The couch where she used to sit. The porch where she once sketched. The kitchen where she laughed over burnt pancakes. Her absence filled every corner like a shadow. Grief is not loud. Not always. Sometimes it is quiet. Heavy. Constant. Like carrying a stone in your chest that never grows lighter. One afternoon, while sorting through her belongings, I found a letter. Folded neatly. Hidden inside her sketchbook. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper felt fragile. Like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. The words were written in her careful handwriting. "I will never forget them. Not as long as I live. Grandma. I'm sorry." I tried to be strong, but the voices in my head won't stop. They keep telling me I don't belong, that I ruin everything. I know you love me and I love you too. But I feel so tired. So empty. Please don't blame yourself. None of this was your fault. I just couldn't carry the pain anymore. I hope someday people learn to be kinder. I hope they understand that words can hurt more than they think. I love you forever. Lena. I collapsed onto the floor after reading it. The paper slipped from my hands. My heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Because even in her final words, she apologized. As if the pain she suffered had been her fault. As if cruelty from strangers was something she had deserved. And that, more than anything, filled me with anger. Not at her. Never at her. But at the world that had allowed hatred to grow so easily. In the years since Lena's death, I have spoken at schools, community centers, libraries, anywhere people will listen. I tell her story again and again. Not because it is easy, but because silence protects cruelty. And I refuse to stay silent anymore. I show her drawings, her colors, her dreams. I tell people what happened. Not to shame them, but to warn them. Because words matter. More than most people realize. A comment typed in anger. A joke made at someone else's expense. A hateful message sent without thought. These things may feel small to the person who sends them. But to the person receiving them, they can feel like the weight of the entire world. If there is one thing I want people to understand, it is this. Kindness is not optional. It is necessary. Essential. Life-saving. Every message you send. Every word you write. Every comment you post. It carries weight. It carries power. And sometimes, it carries consequences you may never see. I am 78 years old now. Older. Slower. More tired than I once was. But I still sit on the back porch every evening. Just like Lena used to. Sometimes I bring her sketchbook with me. Sometimes I talk to her, as if she were still sitting beside me. Maybe that sounds foolish. But grief makes you do strange things. And love never really leaves. There are days when the sunset glows in shades of gold and pink, just like the colors she once painted. On those evenings, I close my eyes and imagine her laughter carried on the wind. Bright, warm, alive. And I whisper the same words every time. I'm still here, sweetheart. I'm still telling your story. So the world remembers you. Because Lena was never meant to disappear. She was meant to create, to inspire, to shine. And though the world lost her too soon, her story remains. A warning, a memory, and a plea. Be kinder than you think you need to be. You never truly know what battles someone else is fighting behind their screen, or behind their smile, or inside their heart.